The blood on Kang Tae-won's Brioni suit was still wet when the child grabbed his hand. Not with fear. Not with hesitation. With trust. The kind of trust that could destroy a man who'd built an empire on the absence of it. In the wreckage of what used to be his downtown office, glass scattered like fallen stars, bodies cooling in the Seoul winter air, this infant looked up at him with eyes that knew something Tae-won had spent 20 years forgetting. The baby's mother lay 3 feet away, her cleaning uniform soaked in crimson, her last breath forming ice crystals in the February cold. And Tae-won, the ghost of Gangnam, the man who'd ordered executions over breakfast, found himself unable to let go of those tiny fingers. Because this child, this impossibility wrapped in a pink blanket, wore a jade pendant identical to the one he'd buried with his sister 15 years ago. The one he'd carved himself. The one that should not exist. Someone once told me these stories would never matter, that no one would listen. If you're here right now, help me prove them wrong. Subscribe, because stories like this deserve a voice. The room still smelled of gunpowder and expensive cologne. Tae-won's second-in-command, Ryu Jin-ho, stood in the doorway, his weapon still drawn, his expression caught between duty and disbelief. Hyungnim, Jin-ho's voice cracked on the honorific. We need to move. The police will be here in 4 minutes. But Tae-won couldn't move. The child, maybe 10 months old, with tight coils of black hair and skin the color of aged mahogany, had locked eyes with him in a way that felt like recognition. Impossible. He'd never seen this baby before tonight. Never seen the mother before tonight. The woman, Amara Okonkwo, according to the ID badge still clipped to her uniform, had been in the wrong place at the catastrophically wrong time. The Sakamoto clan's assassination attempt had turned Tae-won's office into a war zone. They moved through the building like shadows, Tae-won's remaining security team creating a corridor of silence through the chaos. The baby. He needed to stop thinking of her as the baby and start thinking of her as evidence to dispose of, but his mind wouldn't cooperate, stayed quiet against his chest, one hand still clutching that impossible pendant. By the time they reached the underground garage, Tae-won had made 17 decisions that would have horrified him 12 hours ago. The first was not killing the child. The second was ordering Jin-ho to retrieve all security footage. The third was calling Dr. Yoon Min-ji, the only person in Seoul who owed him enough to ask no questions. The 14th through 17th involved finding out everything about Amara Okonkwo and why her child carried his dead sister's jewelry. In the bulletproof Mercedes, with Seoul's neon lights streaking past like tracer rounds, Tae-won looked down at the child in his arms. She'd fallen asleep, her breath soft against his blood-stained collar. The pendant lay against her chest, the jade catching the city glow. Tae-won had carved it himself when he was 19, a birthday gift for his sister Hyejin. A phoenix rising from ashes, surrounded by Korean characters spelling rebirth. He'd held it while identifying her body after the factory fire. He'd buried it with her in Busan. He'd gotten drunk for the first time in his life at her grave and sworn never to be powerless again. That pendant should be ash and bone, 6 feet under Korean soil. Instead, it was here, warm from an infant's skin, mocking everything he knew about the world. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your location below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're feeling this one, hit subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. Dr. Yoon arrived at Tae-won's Hanamdong penthouse at 3 in the morning with a medical bag and visible reluctance. She was 56, silver-haired, and had once removed a bullet from Tae-won's shoulder without anesthesia when he couldn't risk a hospital. She owed him for her son's gambling debts. He owed her for keeping him alive. It was the kind of transaction that defined his world. Kang SSI, she said, using the formal address that meant she was nervous. What exactly am I here for? Tae-won gestured to the nursery he'd ordered Jin-ho to assemble in his guest room. In 90 minutes, his men had transformed a space that once held his weapons collection into something that looked almost normal. Crib, changing table, supplies purchased from a 24-hour store by terrified subordinates who'd never bought baby formula before. The child slept in the center of the crib, the jade pendant placed carefully beside her. Dr. Yoon went very still. "Whose child?" "Mine now," Tae-won said, and meant it in a way that scared him. "I need you to examine her. Make sure she's healthy. Then I need absolute silence about her existence." Dr. Yoon's examination took 30 minutes. The baby woke halfway through, looked at Tae-won standing in the doorway, and smiled. Actually smiled. It did something terrible to his chest. "She's healthy," Dr. Yoon reported, packing her instruments. "Well cared for. No signs of abuse or neglect. Maybe 10 months old. But Kang SSI, I have to ask, don't. There will be questions. Her mother is dead. The child has no one." Tae-won's voice could cut glass. "I'm asking you, as payment for every debt between us, to record that I've taken in a distant relative's child. Legal adoption proceedings to follow. Can you do this?" Dr. Yoon looked at him for a long moment. Then at the baby, who'd grabbed her stethoscope with delighted curiosity. "This isn't like you," she said quietly. "No," Tae-won agreed. "It isn't." 3 days later, Jin-ho brought him the file on Amara Okonkwo, and Tae-won's world tilted again. She'd been 28. Born in Lagos, Nigeria. Immigrated to Korea 6 years ago on a student visa, stayed legally through work permits. Employed by Premier Cleaning Services for the past 3 years. Single mother. No record of the father. And here's where it got strange. 5 years ago, she'd been a graduate student in art history at Seoul National University, specializing in East Asian jade work. The coincidences were piling up like bodies. "There's more," Jin-ho said, sliding a photograph across Tae-won's desk. "We pulled her apartment. Found these." The photos showed Amara's small Itaewon studio. And on every wall, sketches. Hundreds of them. All of the same subject, Korean phoenixes. Rising from flames. Identical to the pendant. She had a whole research project on traditional Korean jade carving, Jin-ho continued. Focused specifically on the Busan workshops from 15 to 20 years ago. The same workshops where Hyejin died. Tae-won's voice was hollow. The factory fire had killed 32 people. His sister had been working there to help pay for his school, even though he'd begged her to stop. The official report called it an accident. Tae-won had spent 3 years proving it was arson, ordered by a rival gang targeting the factory owner. He'd killed everyone responsible. Slowly. It was what made him a legend. And what hollowed him out. Why would a Nigerian graduate student obsess over that fire? Tae-won asked. But Jin-ho had no answer. The baby, he'd started calling her Neri in his mind, a Korean name meaning to soar, was changing his penthouse in ways he couldn't control. The staff he'd terrified for years now moved through the space with bottles and diapers. His cook, a Juma Park, who'd witnessed him break a man's arm over a minor insult, sang lullabies while warming formula. And Tae-won himself, the ghost of Gangnam, found himself awake at 3 a.m., not planning territory expansions, but walking a fussy infant around his living room, her head on his shoulder, her trust in him absolute and unearned. "You're getting soft," his consigliere, Oh Dae-young, said during their weekly meeting. The older man had served Tae-won's predecessor and survived 3 regime changes through strategic wisdom. "Soft gets you killed." "Noted," Tae-won said, signing off on a container shipment while Neri played with wooden blocks at his feet. She'd started crawling yesterday. Started babbling sounds that weren't quite words, but felt like conversation. "The Sakamoto clan is regrouping. They know they failed. They'll try again. Let them try. Daejang studied him. You used to say that with conviction. Now you sound distracted. I'm not distracted. But he was. Because that night, going through Amara's research more carefully, Tae-won found the connection that changed everything. Hidden in her notes was a name, Yoon Hye-jin, his sister. Amara had been researching his sister specifically, had tracked down survivors of the factory fire, had interviewed them about Hye-jin's jade carving skills, her dreams of opening her own workshop, her protective love for her younger brother, who she'd die for. And in the margins of one page, in Amara's handwriting, she saved them. No one remembers this. She saved 7 people before the roof collapsed, including the owner's pregnant wife. Why does no one remember her heroism? Why is she just a name on a victim list? Tae-won sat in his study until dawn. That research spread before him, nary asleep in a portable crib he'd moved into every room he occupied now. His sister had died a hero. And this stranger, this woman from across the world, had cared enough to document it. Had cared enough to carve a pendant in Hye-jin's memory. Had cared enough to, what? Give it to her own child? Why? The answer came 3 days later, delivered by Jin-ho with shaking hands. DNA results, he said simply. Tae-won had ordered tests run on Neri, himself, and samples from Hye-jin's belongings he'd kept. The results were impossible. Neri shared DNA with Hye-jin. Not with Tae-won, she wasn't his niece. But the genetic markers suggested Hye-jin's mitochondrial DNA, maternal line, which made absolutely no sense because Hye-jin had died childless. Died a virgin, actually, too devoted to family and work for romance. There's a note from the lab, Jin-ho added. They flagged this as potentially compromised samples. Said we should retest. The results suggest the child's maternal ancestry traces to your sister, but that's impossible, Tae-won finished. Unless it wasn't. Tae-won spent the next week becoming 2 people. One was the Kang Tae-won Seoul knew, ruthless, calculating, expanding his empire into Incheon's port systems while crushing the Sakamoto clan's remaining operations. The other was a man who'd learned to warm bottles at the exact temperature, who'd discovered that Neri laughed when he made silly faces, who'd rearranged his entire schedule around nap times and developmental milestones. His men didn't know what to do with the second version. Hyungnim, Jin-ho said carefully, watching Tae-won pace the conference room with Neri against his shoulder during a high-stakes negotiation. Maybe a Jama Park should, I've got her, Tae-won said, and continued dictating terms for a territorial truce while patting Neri's back until she burped. The other crime bosses in the room looked horrified. He'd never felt more powerful. Because here's what Tae-won understood that they didn't. A man with nothing to lose is dangerous. But a man with everything to lose and the will to protect it? Unstoppable. Still, the mystery of Amara and the pendant consumed him. He hired private investigators. Tracked down every person who'd known Hye-jin. Found the 7 people she'd saved from the fire, now scattered across Korea, living ordinary lives because his sister had given them that chance. One of them, a woman named Kim Soon-ok, now 53 and running a bakery in Daejeon, went pale when Tae-won showed her the pendant. I remember this, she whispered. Hye-jin was wearing it the day of the fire. I asked her about it because it was so beautiful. She said her brother made it for her birthday. Said it meant they'd always rise again, no matter what tried to keep them down. Did she give it to anyone? Before she died? Soon-ok shook her head. She died in my arms. The roof collapsed. She pushed me clear and took the impact. Her last words were about you. Said to tell you it wasn't his fault. That you shouldn't blame yourself. That she chose this life to give you a better one. Tae-won hadn't cried at Hye-jin's funeral. Hadn't cried during the 3 years he spent hunting her killers. Hadn't cried when he built an empire on the foundation of her death. But sitting in Kim Sunoke's bakery, with Neri playing with sugar packets in his lap, something cracked. She was a hero, Sunoke continued. My daughter lives because of her. I was 8 months pregnant. Hygiene got me out first. Then went back for others. Why are you asking about this now? Tae-won showed her a photo of Amara. Sunoke's face transformed. Oh, the researcher. She came to see me 2 years ago. Such a kind woman. She was documenting Hygiene's heroism. Said she discovered the story while researching Korean jade artisans and became obsessed with making sure Hygiene wasn't forgotten. She interviewed all of us. Was writing a book, I think. Did she say why she cared so much? She said. Sunoke paused, remembering. She said that in her culture, ancestors speak through time. That Hygiene's spirit had called to her across the world. That some debts transcend death. I thought she was being poetic. But she was serious. Absolutely serious. Tae-won returned to Seoul with more questions than answers. But that night, while researching West African spiritual traditions because his life had become that strange, he found something. In Igbo culture, which Amara's last name suggested she belonged to, there was a belief in reincarnation. In ancestral spirits choosing new bodies. In spiritual debts that demanded repayment across lifetimes. He was a practical man. He'd built an empire on strategy, not superstition. But watching Neri sleep, the jade pendant around her neck, Tae-won couldn't deny the impossible. This child felt like Hygiene. Moved like her. Had her expressions. Her gentleness. Amara had known something. Had understood something. Had given her child to him with purpose. Then the second DNA report came back. Jin-ho delivered it personally, his face ashen. You need to read this yourself, he said. The new tests, more comprehensive, revealed something the first had missed. Neri's DNA contained markers from Amara and from Tae-won himself. Not paternal markers. That would be impossible. He'd never met Amara before that night. But genetic markers that suggested, incomprehensibly, that both Tae-won and Amara contributed to Neri's existence. The lab is calling it contaminated samples again, Jin-ho said. They've never seen anything like it. They're asking for a third test. No, Tae-won said quietly. Because he understood now. Or was beginning to. Amara had done something. Some kind of ritual, some spiritual working, that mixed his bloodline with hers through Hygiene's memory. Had created a child that was both entirely hers and impossibly theirs, his and his sister's legacy, reborn through a stranger's love and devotion. It should be insane. But he'd seen stranger things in 20 years of living in shadows. And every time he looked at Neri, he saw his sister looking back. Here's something I need to know, and I want you to really think about it. If someone you lost could come back to you in a way you never expected, in a form you didn't recognize, would you accept them? Or would logic and fear keep you from the miracle? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one, and your perspective might help someone else who needs to hear it. The attack came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Tae-won had stopped pretending Neri wasn't the center of his universe. The Sakamoto clan had been quiet. Too quiet. Tae-won should have anticipated it, but fatherhood had made him sloppy. Or so he'd let them think. They hit the penthouse at dawn, 8 men with military precision. What they didn't know is that Tae-won had been expecting them. Had laid a trap. Because the ghost of Gangnam could walk a baby at 3 a.m. and still orchestrate a counteroffensive. The assault lasted 4 minutes. Tae-won's security doubled, trained, prepared, cut through the Sakamoto team like a surgical strike. But one got through. One always got through. Tae-won found him in Neri's nursery, standing over her crib with a weapon raised. And here's where time did something strange. Tae-won had killed 37 people in his career. Always calculated. Always controlled. But seeing that gun pointed at Neri, at the impossibility he'd somehow been given a second chance to protect. Something ancient and howling tore loose inside him. He crossed the room faster than thought, caught the assassin's wrist, broke it in 3 places before the man could scream, then broke everything else. Hyungnim. Jinho appeared in the doorway, weapon drawn, then stopped. Because Kang Tae-won, the man who prided himself on control, was beating a man to death with his bare hands while a baby watched. Not crying, just watching. Like she knew this violence was love. When it was over, when the assassin was a broken thing leaking on expensive carpet, Tae-won lifted Neri from her crib. She reached for his face with both hands, smearing blood on his cheek, and laughed. "Clean this up," he told Jinho. His voice was steady. His hands were not. "And bring me Sakamoto Takashi. Alive." They delivered the Sakamoto underboss 6 hours later, bound and terrified, to the warehouse in Incheon where Tae-won conducted business that couldn't see daylight. Neri was with Ajuma Park, safe in the penthouse under enough security to protect a president. Tae-won had kissed her forehead before leaving. Had promised to come back. Had meant it with everything in him. Sakamoto Takashi was 52, second-generation Yakuza, responsible for the initial assassination attempt that had killed Amara. Tae-won had spent 3 weeks learning everything about him. His loves. His fears. His weaknesses. "Kong-san," Takashi said, using the Japanese honorific with contempt. "If you're going to kill me, spare me the theater." "I'm not going to kill you," Tae-won said quietly. "I'm going to give you a choice." He showed Takashi the photos from Amara's apartment. The research. The drawings. The evidence of a woman who devoted years to honoring a stranger's heroism. "You killed someone who was good," Tae-won said. "Actually good. Not good by our standards, where mercy is weakness and loyalty is currency. Good by human standards. She was documenting my sister's heroism, making sure the world remembered her. And you turned her into collateral damage." Takashi's face flickered with something that might have been shame. The hit wasn't about her. She was just in the wrong place. "I know. They always are, aren't they? The innocent ones." Tae-won circled him slowly. "Her daughter survived. I've taken her in." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to carry a message to your Oyabun. Tell him that the Sakamoto clan's war with me ends now. Completely. Or I will systematically dismantle everything he's built, starting with his legitimate businesses and ending with his grandchildren's futures. Not their lives, I'm not a monster. But their futures. I will make sure they inherit ashes." Tae-won leaned close. "I learned from the best, Takashi-san. My sister taught me that protection is the highest form of love. And I will protect that child with everything I am. Which means anyone who threatens her faces not just Kang Tae-won the gangster, but Kang Tae-won the father. And you don't want to meet that version of me." He straightened. "You have 24 hours to broker peace. If your answer is war, I'll start by burning down the Shinjuku import operations. Then I'll work my way through every asset your clan owns. I've already got the intelligence. The question is whether you're smart enough to stop me." Takashi was released an hour later, unharmed but shaking. Jinho watched him go with confusion written all over his face. "You're letting him live?" "I'm letting him choose," Tae-won corrected. "And betting that even Yakuza Oyabuns aren't stupid enough to continue a war that'll cost them everything." The peace offer came within 12 hours. Complete territorial withdrawal from Seoul. Reparations. An acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Tae-won accepted with conditions, a public apology to Amara's memory, and funding for a scholarship in her name at Seoul National University for African students studying Korean art history. The Sakamoto clan agreed. Because they'd realized what Tae-won had become, a man with purpose beyond profit. Which made him infinitely more dangerous than when he'd had nothing to lose. That night, Tae-won sat in Neri's nursery while she slept, the jade pendant gleaming in the low light. He'd had it authenticated by 3 experts. All confirmed it was the original, his carving, his gift, supposedly buried with hygiene. But here it was, warm and real. Jin-ho found him there at 2 a.m. "The men are talking," he said carefully. "Saying you've changed. Some think you're weak now. That the child is a liability. What do you think?" Tae-won asked. Jin-ho was quiet for a long moment. "I think I've followed you for 8 years because you were the most dangerous man in Seoul. Now you're the most dangerous man in Seoul who has something to protect. That's not weakness. That's evolution." He paused. "But you need to know, there are whispers. Not in our organization. But others. They see opportunity. A man distracted by fatherhood. Let them try," Tae-won said softly. "I'm counting on it. Because I need to send a larger message about what happens to people who threaten my family." Jin-ho smiled then. The sharp smile of a predator who'd just understood the trap. "You've been waiting for someone to test you." "Always." Tae-won looked at Neri. "I learned from the best, Jin-ho. My sister taught me that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. And right now, anyone who mistakes my love for weakness is about to discover just how hot that fire burns." The test came 3 days later, from the most unexpected direction. The woman who appeared in Tae-won's office had Amara's cheekbones and eyes like judgment. She gave her name as Chioma Okonkwo, produced a Nigerian passport, and informed him she was Neri's aunt. "I've come for my sister's child," she said without preamble. Tae-won had been expecting this, had prepared for it. But seeing Amara's face in this stranger's features still hit like a punch. "No," he said simply. Chioma's expression hardened. "I'm her blood relative. I can prove it. Amara and I were sisters. That child belongs with family. I am her family. You're a crime lord who's kept her illegally for a month." Chioma pulled out documentation, legal papers, custody petitions, DNA tests proving her relationship to Amara. "I've been searching for my sister since she stopped answering calls. Found out she died in a gang war crossfire. Found out you took her daughter. Now I'm taking her back." Tae-won studied her. Saw grief there, yes. But also anger. Determination. Love. "Did Amara ever mention me?" he asked. "Or my sister?" Chioma faltered. "What?" "Your sister spent 2 years researching my family. Documenting my sister Hygiene's heroism. She carried a jade pendant that should be buried in Busan. She gave that pendant to Neri before she died. So I'll ask again, did she ever mention why?" "Amara was obsessed with your sister's story," Chioma admitted quietly. "After she found it during her graduate research, she couldn't let it go. Spent years tracking down survivors, documenting evidence. She said Hygiene's spirit spoke to her. That she had a debt to repay." "What debt?" "Our grandmother," Chioma said, and suddenly she looked tired. "She died when Amara was 22. Car accident in Lagos. Amara went through a crisis afterward. Spiritual crisis. She'd always been connected to the traditional ways, but after grandmother passed, it became consuming. She said grandmother came to her in dreams. Told her about a debt our bloodline owed to a Korean woman who died in fire. Told her she needed to honor this woman's memory or our family would never find peace." Tae-won went very still. "A debt. I thought she was processing grief strangely," Chioma continued. "But she moved to Korea. Found Hygiene's story. Devoted herself to making sure your sister was remembered. And then, she swallowed hard. Then she got pregnant. Wouldn't tell anyone who the father was. Just said that she'd been chosen to complete the circle. That her child would bridge 2 worlds. Did she ever explain what that meant?" Chioma shook her head. "Amara became very private in her last year. Protective. She sent me letters about Neri, but they were cryptic. talked about spiritual inheritance, about debts paid through love, about creating family where before there was only loss. She looked directly at Tae-won. The last letter I received, 3 weeks before she died, said that if anything happened to her, Neri would find her way to the right person. That I should trust the universe's plan. And you think I'm the right person? Tae-won asked. A gangster. I think my sister was many things, but she wasn't wrong about spiritual matters, Chioma said. And I think there's a reason she was in your building that night. A reason her daughter survived. A reason you, of all people, took her and instead of leaving her for the authorities. She pulled out another document. A journal, worn and filled with Amara's handwriting. This was in her apartment. I think you should read it. The journal documented 2 years of spiritual work. Rituals performed at Hyejine's grave. Prayers said in both Igbo and Korean. And a ceremony performed 9 months before Neri's birth that made Tae-won's blood run cold. Amara had gone to Busan, had found Hyejine's grave, had performed an Igbo ritual of spiritual adoption, mixing earth from the grave with her own blood, asking Hyejine's spirit to join with her unborn child, to give that child the strength and purpose that had died in the fire, to allow Hyejin to live again through love. This is insane, Tae-won whispered. But he was holding Neri's DNA results, seeing his sister's genetic markers in a child who shouldn't have them. Is it? Chioma asked. Or is it just a truth that doesn't fit your worldview? She stood. I came here ready to fight you for Neri. To take her back to Lagos, raise her with our family. But reading Amara's journal, seeing how you've cared for her. She gestured around the penthouse, at the nursery visible through the open door, at the photos Tae-won had already hung. Neri laughing, Neri playing, Neri sleeping peacefully in his arms. My sister chose this. Chose you. Performed rituals I don't fully understand to make sure Hyejine's legacy lived on through her daughter. Who am I to undo that? You're her family, Tae-won said roughly. So are you, apparently. Chioma smiled sadly. In ways that transcend blood. So here's what I propose. I won't fight you for custody. But I want to be in Neri's life. Want her to know her Nigerian heritage alongside whatever you teach her about Korea. Can you accept that? Tae-won thought about Hyejin. About how she'd always believed family was choice, not just biology. About how she died saving strangers because that's what heroes do. Neri should know where she comes from, he said. All of where she comes from. I'll need to run background checks, ensure your safety, set up security protocols. I'm an international law attorney, Chioma interrupted dryly. I think I can handle your security protocols. Then we have an agreement. They shook hands, 2 people from different worlds, bound now by a child who was herself a bridge between worlds. That night, Tae-won read Amara's journal cover to cover. Read about her first dream of Hyejin, 3 days after her grandmother's death. How Hyejin had appeared as a phoenix, burning but not consumed, telling Amara that heroism creates debts that ripple through generations. Read about Amara's decision to honor that debt through documentation first, then through something deeper. A spiritual adoption that would give Hyejin's essence new life. Read Amara's final entry, dated the day before she died. Tomorrow I'll clean the office building downtown. I've felt pulled there for weeks. Don't know why. But I trust the path. If you're reading this, sister, it means the circle is complete. Neri is where she needs to be. And I've repaid the debt our grandmother showed me. Tell my daughter she was born from love across lifetimes. Tell her that some families are chosen by forces bigger than us. Tell her to be brave. Tae-won closed the journal with shaking hands. Amara had known. Had walked into that building knowing she might die. Had brought Neri because what? Because spirits and fate and impossible things had demanded it? He should reject this. Should attribute it to coincidence and magical thinking. But he couldn't. Because Neri was asleep in the next room, the jade pendant around her neck, and every time he looked at her he saw his sister's eyes looking back. 6 months later, Tae-won sat in the same office where Amara had died, now completely rebuilt. Glass replaced, walls repainted, no evidence remaining of that night except the memories. And sitting on his desk, laughing as she tried to eat a wooden block, was Neri. 16 months old now. Walking. Almost talking. Already showing signs of hygiene's artistic talent, she could stack blocks into impossible patterns, seemed to understand symmetry and balance in ways that made Tae-won's chest ache. "You're going to be late," Jin-ho said from the doorway. "The ceremony starts in an hour." Right. The ceremony. Tae-won had funded the Yoon Hygiene Memorial Scholarship in full, plus endowed a new wing at Seoul National University for African-Korean cultural exchange programs. Chioma had helped establish it, working with Korean officials to create something that honored both Hygiene and Amara. Today was the dedication. Today, the world would finally know his sister's heroism. "Come here, little one," Tae-won said, lifting Neri into his arms. She grabbed his face with both hands, said Appa clear as day. She'd started calling him that 3 weeks ago, and it destroyed him every time, and then pointed at the jade pendant he'd started wearing himself. A second one, carved to match hers. Phoenix twins. He'd made it by hand, learning jade carving from the same master his sister had studied under. It had taken him 4 months. Every night after Neri slept, he'd worked on it, bleeding into the stone, pouring everything he couldn't say into the curves and lines. When it was finished, the old master had wept. "Your sister would be proud," he'd said. The ceremony was beautiful. Hundreds of people attended, the 7 survivors Hygiene had saved, their families, students receiving the new scholarships, academics, officials. Chioma gave a speech about cross-cultural healing and spiritual inheritance that had people crying. Tae-won stood at the back with Neri, watching the world finally recognize what his sister had been, what she'd given, what she still was. After, a young woman approached. Nigerian, maybe 20, one of the new scholarship recipients. "Mr. Kang," she said shyly. "I wanted to thank you. This scholarship, it's changing my life. I'm studying Korean ceramics, hoping to create bridges between African and Asian art forms. That would make my sister happy," Tae-won said. "And Amara Okonkwo. Did you know her?" The girl shook her head. "But I've read her research. She was brilliant. I'm trying to continue her work, document other forgotten heroes, other stories that deserve remembering." Neri reached for the girl, babbling something in her half-language. The girl laughed, let Neri grab her finger. "She's beautiful," she said. "She looks like she has old eyes. Like she's seen things beyond her years." "She has," Tae-won said quietly. "In ways I'm still trying to understand." Later, at the penthouse, with Neri asleep and the jade pendants side by side on his desk, Tae-won opened his laptop. He'd been writing something. A document he'd update throughout Neri's life, so she'd understand her story when she was old enough. "Dear Neri," it began. "By the time you read this, you'll have questions about who you are and where you came from. You'll know you're adopted. You'll know your mother died the night I found you. You'll know I'm not the conventional father figure. Here's what you need to understand. You were born from an impossible act of love. Your mother, Amara, was a woman who believed in debts that transcend lifetimes. She honored my sister Hygiene, who died before you were born but whose spirit somehow lives in you. I don't understand how. Maybe I never will. But I feel it every time you smile. Every time you create something beautiful. Every time you show the kind of fearless kindness that got my sister killed. You are both entirely yourself and somehow a continuation of something that should have ended 15 years ago. Your Aunt Chioma will tell you about your Nigerian heritage. about the spiritual traditions that made you possible. I'll tell you about Korea, about your namesake, Neri means to soar, and also wings, and about the woman whose phoenix pendant you wear. Together, we'll help you understand that you're not just one thing. You're a bridge, a miracle, a second chance I didn't deserve but will spend my life honoring. I'm a bad man who's done terrible things. I won't hide that from you. But loving you has made me want to be better. To build something beyond just power and territory. To create a legacy that your mother and my sister would be proud of. You'll face challenges I can't protect you from. Questions about identity, belonging, purpose. But remember this, you were chosen. Not by me alone, but by forces that move through the world in ways we barely comprehend. You carry the strength of women who sacrificed everything for others. And you carry my promise that I will always, always protect you while teaching you to protect yourself. Be brave, little phoenix. Your wings are just beginning to grow. He saved the document. Added to it every week. A running record of her life, her development, his observations about how she seemed to know things she shouldn't. How she'd cry at the sight of the old factory, even though she'd never been there before. How she'd drawn phoenixes before she could write. How she looked at Hygiene's photo with recognition. Chioma visited every month, bringing pieces of Legos, teaching Neri Igbo words alongside her Korean ones, telling stories about Amara's brilliance and kindness. They'd become family in the truest sense, not bound by blood alone but by shared purpose. Tae-won's empire evolved. He started legitimate businesses funded by shadow money, created jobs, invested in communities, stayed dangerous enough that no one tested him, but directed that danger toward protection rather than expansion. You've gone soft, Dae-young observed one day, but he was smiling. Not soft, Tae-won corrected, watching Neri play in the penthouse garden Jinho had helped him build. Focused. Because here's what he'd learned, power without purpose is just violence. But power wielded to protect something precious? That's legacy. The Sakamoto clan kept their peace. Word spread through Seoul's underworld that Kang Tae-won had evolved into something more dangerous than a simple crime boss. A man who'd kill you for threatening his daughter, yes. But who'd also systematically dismantle your entire organization, salt the earth where your businesses stood, and make sure your name was forgotten. The ghost of Gangnam became the phoenix of Hanamdong. Still dangerous. Still deadly. But building now instead of just destroying. On Neri's second birthday, Tae-won took her to Busan. To Hygiene's grave. He'd had it renovated, simple but beautiful, with a phoenix carved in stone. Neri toddled up to it, touched the carving, and said clear as day, "Pretty." Yes, Tae-won agreed, his voice rough. Your aunt was very pretty. And brave. And kind. Everything I hope you'll be. Neri looked at him with those old eyes. Smiled. Then pulled the jade pendant from under her shirt and held it against the stone carving. For just a moment, probably imagination, probably grief and hope tangling together, Tae-won could have sworn the pendant glowed warm. Could have sworn he felt Hygiene's presence, approving, peaceful, complete. "Thank you," he whispered to whatever forces had orchestrated this impossible gift. "I won't waste it." That night, back in Seoul, Chioma called with news. "I'm moving to Korea," she said. "Taking a position at an international law firm here. I want to be closer to Neri. If that's all right with you." "More than all right," Tae-won said. She should have family around her. All of her family. Even the criminal element? Chioma teased. Especially the criminal element who's going increasingly legitimate out of paternal responsibility. They laughed. Planned. Built a future around this child who shouldn't exist, but did. And Tae-won realized something. For 20 years, he'd been trying to rise from the ashes of his sister's death. Had built an empire on her memory, thinking that power was the answer. But real resurrection didn't come through vengeance or control. It came through love, through second chances, through impossible children who carried the best parts of the people you'd lost. Neri would grow up knowing she was loved, knowing her mother's sacrifices, knowing her father, and he was her father now, in every way that mattered, would burn the world down to keep her safe. But more than that, she'd grow up knowing she was a bridge between worlds, cultures, the living and the dead. A phoenix born from ashes, carrying the light of women who refused to let heroism die. Appa, Neri said, climbing into his lap as he worked. She was holding a crayon and paper, having drawn another phoenix. They filled the penthouse now, her art. Reminders of what she carried. Yes, little one. Love you. 3 words. Her first real sentence. And Kang Tae-won, the ghost of Gangnam, the man who'd never cried in front of anyone, felt tears streak down his face. I love you too, he whispered. More than anything in this world or the next. Outside, Seoul glittered like possibilities. Inside, a crime lord held his impossible daughter and understood, finally, what his sister had been trying to teach him all along. True strength isn't in power. It's in what you choose to protect. And he would protect this child, this miracle, this second chance, with everything he was and everything he'd ever be. The phoenix had risen. And this time, she would soar. Listen, I'm going to be real with you. You just spent time with this story. You felt something or you wouldn't have made it this far. These stories? They matter because you make them matter. If this touched you at all, if Neri's journey meant something, if you believe in second chances and impossible love, share it. Subscribe. Don't let this just be another story you scroll past and forget. Because somewhere, someone needs to hear that families can be chosen, that debts can be repaid across lifetimes, that even the hardest hearts can learn to love. Be that person who makes sure they hear it. Please.